Good afternoon. On behalf of our family, I want to welcome you and thank you all for coming on this beautiful day to honor our dad, husband, uncle, brother, and friend, Carrol Martin. Let's face it, solstice was Dad's favorite celebration. I take that back. If it involved music, food, family, and friends, it was always his favorite celebration. So today we celebrate a life that was abundantly lived for God, his family, and our community. Dad was a dreamer and a salesman, and I'm positive the reason you are here today is because of that fact. There isn't enough time in 100 years to mention everything Dad did in the 79 years. I'm literally excited about hearing your stories of your encounters with my dad. He was amazing, and I know I shouldn't be surprised, but I am overwhelmed from all of the posts on the Carrol Martin Memorial Facebook page and the support from you, the community. Thank you for all of your support and prayers that you have shown our family. The other day I was listening to the radio and the man was talking about organizing his tools in his garage, and he talked about how he places all of his tools, and there was this one drawer that had a whole bunch of screwdrivers. And some of them had been stripped out, some of them had gunk on them, but there was always those two screwdrivers that he would always go to. They fit really well in his hand, and he knew that when he picked up that screwdriver, it would do exactly what it was designed to do. And they just felt strong in his hand. And my dad was one of those tools. When the Lord had something that he needed to be done, he knew Dad would get it done. Please join us in prayer as Ron comes to pray.
So let's pray. Lord, we just thank you for this beautiful day that you've given us. Thank you for friends, family, everybody coming together to honor this wonderful man of God that you gave so many wonderful adventures to. Thank you for all the lives that he touched. Thank you for the love that he showed to so many people. Help us to honor him today. Be with those that are going to speak. Let us laugh. Let us cry. Let us rejoice in the life that you gave him. Rejoice in his family. Rejoice in this wonderful moment that we have together to honor him. And in the Lord's name we pray. Amen.
I'm sure if Dad was here, he'd have a short joke to tell, but...
This is the short joke right here. I had to raise the mic for you.
I walked off the stage.
Yes, I want to thank everyone for being here, and I want to take this time to read Dad's obituary that was in the paper, and just pause and think about a life well lived. Longtime Alaska resident Carrol J. Martin went to be with his Lord and Savior at 4 a.m. on March 26th, 2020. With his loving wife, Joanne, by his side, Carrol was born on July 21st, 1940, in Bayfield, Colorado, and grew up working on the family ranch. It was there where his love of raising quality cattle and registered American quarter horses began. Carrol joined 4-H when he was 9 years old and spent the rest of his life as a member, a junior leader, a volunteer leader, and an advisor to the program. He graduated from Fort Lewis College with an associate's degree in business management. While at Fort Lewis, he worked part-time for the college, taking care of flowers and planting trees. Carrol continued his education and graduated with honors from Adams State College in Alamosa, Colorado, with a BA in business education and an MA in secondary and elementary education. In 1961, while attending Adams State College, he met Joanne Blair, the local Cooperative Extension Service home economist, 4-H advisor. During their courtship, Joanne told Carrol she always wanted to live in Alaska, but she didn't want to go there alone. Carrol said he would be happy to take her, and she informed him they'd have to get married first. So they were married in Alamosa on December 15th, 1962, and left for Alaska, August 19th, 1963. And I might add, they brought me with them in utero. While teaching in Metlakatla, traveling to Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau, and researching the whole state, they determined they wanted to spend the rest of their lives somewhere on the Kenai Peninsula. In 1972, the Martin family permanently moved to Alaska. One of Dad's favorite stories to tell was when he bought a 1940-era Army surplus tugboat and barge and loaded it with a year's worth of hay, a mobile home, vehicles, horses, cows, and the family's belongings, and he and his 9-year-old son, Little Joe, yes, that's what they called me back then, the 3 deckhands sailed at the inside passage from Tacoma, Washington to Juneau, equipped with only a compass and a prayer. You name it, Carrol did it. In high school, he worked as a butcher at the local mercantile. He baked hundreds of pies a week for the family-owned truck stop, worked in a family-owned potato chip and rainbow bread distributorship. He was a teacher, a principal, and a college professor. He later retired from Unocal in 1991. Yes, Dad was a butcher, a baker, a potato chip maker, and an educator. Carrol's zeal for life was evident in everything he did. He loved sharing stories about his family, farming, and adventures, not only to anyone he met, but especially to his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, whom he loved dearly. He loved giving farm tours, which typically turn into a history or a science lesson. His ability to remember names, dates, and other important details was uncanny. His stories may or may not have been embellished a little, but one never really knew for sure because he spoke with such conviction and matter of fact. Carrol lived life to the fullest, and everything he did had purpose. His motto was to be kind to everyone because you never knew if they might be an angel. He was always intentional with every relationship, wanting to know every detail about your life, whether a stranger in the store or a hitchhiker on the road. Carrol always remembered who they were and their story. Whether it was barbecuing homegrown beef in that big choo-choo train for Kenai Central Homecoming, Arctic Winter Games, or Industry Appreciation Day, the Kenai Peninsula State Fair, Solstice here at the Diamond M Ranch, or baking pies for ABC Life Choice Annual Pie Auction, or making pies for the Kenai Peninsula Food Bank Annual Soup Supper, Carrol was always willing to give of his time and resources. Really, he never did anything for self. It was always to benefit someone else or another entity. Because of Carrol's outstanding volunteer service, in 2012, he was inducted into the National 4-H Hall of Fame. Since 2003, only 4 Alaskans have been inducted, and Carrol was the only volunteer. The others were cooperative extension professionals. Carrol is survived by his wife of 57 years, Joanne, son Blair, who's married to Rana, daughter Lisa, who's married to Glenn, son Jonathan, married to Maria, 9 grandchildren, 4 great-grandchildren, and he is preceded in death by his father, Joseph Vinoy Martin, his mother, Veda Mary Harris, his brother, Julian Martin, his son, James William Martin, and his grandson, Matthias Nicola Martin. Carrol loved music, dance, and feeding the community, so in honor of him, we dedicate this Solstice Music Festival 2020 with music until 10 p.m. or whenever. Thank you for coming and to share memories of a great man on a great day.
All right, look at that. The sun just came out. Beautiful day here. Hello, Joanne. I just got on an airplane yesterday afternoon and just got here a few minutes before the service. So happy to be here, honored to be here. And they asked me to sing a song. And when I thought of Carrol, I thought of the word grace. He was a very graceful man. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Was grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed, when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun. We've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. Amen.
Anyway, I'm the son-in-law, and unfortunately, Adam Myers, our minister at Kenai Christian Church, where Carrol and Joanne were members for 40 plus years, couldn't make it today, but he wrote a tribute to Carrol, so I'm going to read that, and hopefully I can get through this. So, anyways, Adam wrote this, and it's titled, "They Don't Make 'Em Like They Used To," a tribute to Carrol Martin. It says, "They don't make 'em like they used to" is an expression that I've heard over the years, mostly applied to things such as vehicles, tools, and other necessary gadgets. The concept is that something you need, especially in a moment of crisis, typically fails when you need it to work because it isn't made like it used to be. Imagine you are changing the oil in your truck. You've drained the oil out and changed the filter, and the only thing left is to put the drain plug back in to refill your vehicle with fresh oil. And while you're tightening the drain plug, the head breaks off, leaving the threaded end of the plug jutting out and extending your 15-minute project into an all-day affair. You might look at that broken plug and say, well, they don't make them like they used to. What you are implying is that the older plugs were uniquely made, dependable, and strong. When I think of Carrol Martin, my mind immediately goes to, they don't make them like they used to. There is no question in my mind that Carrol was uniquely made by his Creator. He was larger than life with such a spirit of adventure. There hasn't been a book written about Carrol at this point. Someone better get on it because he was the stuff that legends are made of. I've listened for hours to him or others telling stories about what he has done over the years, to which I respond, are you pulling my leg? Seriously. It's as if people are telling me a tall tale like Paul Bunyan and inserting Carrol's name just to see if I'd take the bait. But no, they were shooting straight with me. The things that Carrol accomplished in his life, the things that he made seem normal, wouldn't even be attempted by anyone else. That's because God created Carrol unique, setting him apart from the rest of us, and I haven't even touched on his style yet. Who else could pull off an Alaska cowboy look the way Carrol did? He did his own thing, embracing life while the world observed in curiosity. We would all be containing ourselves on the sidelines, concerned about what others think about us, while Carrol would be in the middle of a room, literally dancing in joy. They don't make them like they used to. Need help with something? Got a project that could use an extra hand? Carrol was the type of guy to jump in to help, and he was dependable. Bible tells us in Matthew 5:37 to let your yes be yes and your no be no. Well, if Carrol said yes to you, there wasn't a contract needed because his word was dependable. Consider all the ways he helped make our community a better place, helping start and build churches, 4-H's, community barbecues, Maddie's Farm, and the list goes on. Those he interacted with in each of these areas would tell you that he was as dependable as the sun coming up. Think with me for a moment how many lives he impacted and was able to influence because of his dependability. Hundreds, thousands, God knows and looks down with a smile. That's because they don't make them like they used to. I looked up the definition of the word strong in Webster's dictionary, and sure enough, there was Carrol's name. He might as well be King David, as was described in Scripture as ruddy and handsome, and I wasn't sure that he meant until I met Carrol. Now he's all I can see when I read the words in the Bible. Strength comes in many forms, physical, emotional, spiritual, and he was strong in each of those areas. How else could you wrangle livestock, build a farm, and do it in Alaska all the way back in the 60s? His physical strength allowed him to do so much, but in the end he took quite a toll on his body, and yet even when his body failed him and the pain set in, he continued to work without complaint or giving up. Sometimes the strong, manly types lack emotion, but not Carrol. He loved and cared deeply, not in just words, but in action. His love for his family was evident, especially for his wife, Joanne. And ask anyone related to him if they knew that Carrol loved them, and you'd find a unanimous yes. He loved his community, the unborn, the marginalized, and he expressed that love through action. Spiritually, Carrol loved Jesus, and everyone knew that about him. When life was hard on Carrol, and we know he endured some significant tragedies, he leaned heavily into Jesus for support. His faith sustained him through life's many joys and trials, and was contagious the way he shared his faith through words and especially by example. They don't make them like they used to. So here we are, remembering and celebrating the life and legacy known as Carrol Martin. The world is a better place because of him. Will continue to be a better place as his example will be carried out by those of us who knew him. It's difficult to lose someone you love and respect so much, but be comforted by these words found in 1 Thessalonians 4:13 and 14. Brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of the world who have no hope. For we believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we believe that God will bring Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. Carrol believes these words because he placed his life in the hands of Jesus Christ, and he'd want everyone here to believe and live with Jesus as well, because they don't make him like they used to. If you don't know where to start your journey with Jesus, speak to anyone in Carrol's family, and they will help you because they are uniquely made, dependable, and strong, just like Carrol. And I just wanted to share one little story, how Carrol loved people, and it, as Adam said, it affects us and it'll carry on. But when I'm driving down the road and I see a hitchhiker, I feel bad if I pass him up because Carrol never passed up a hitchhiker. And when he got done dropping off the hitchhiker, he knew his brother, his sister, his mother, his father, where he lived, where he came from, how he got here, and everything else about him. When I pick up a hitchhiker, I'm lucky if I can remember his name, but he had the memory of an elephant, and he would tell you stories about people he just picked up on the road. Sometimes he'd bring them here, put them to work, but whatever they needed, he would give them. So that's just one story of many that I know many people here have experienced, and many people that aren't here have experienced. So Carrol was quite the man. I just thank God that I had him as a father-in-law and as an example to stand up and be a father and grandfather to my grandchildren. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I am one of many grandchildren. Felt like I needed to share some things. So I'll start off with we're not here, we're not just here to celebrate his life, but Grandpa's legacy. You know, Grandpa made a huge impact on my life, and I know many others. He was always willing to lend a helping hand, and he was always selfless. I never thought of him as being selfish for any reason. He was always wanting to give his shirt off his back to anybody. As my stepdad said, pick up hitchhikers, share the love of Jesus with them. He was always bringing people who was less fortunate or needed a helping hand on the property to teach them work ethic, and he taught me a lot of work ethic. I know several times where I felt like there was no hope, but Grandpa was always willing to bring me in and put me to work and encourage me. And like Glenn was saying, that he was always interested in other people's lives. I just remember him telling stories of hitchhikers, or just he would know somebody. He would know everyone knew him. He knew everyone, their stories. It was encouraging because I lacked that sometimes. So he was always full of wisdom, grace, peace, and understanding, and he was the perfect reflection of my Heavenly Father's heart. And a couple of verses that really represent Grandpa was 2 Corinthians 3:18, where he says, "We can all draw close to him with the veil removed from our faces, and with no veil we all become like mirrors who brightly reflect the glory of the Lord Jesus. We are being transfigured into his very image as we move from one brighter level of glory to another. And this glorious transfiguration comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit." And that was Grandpa. Grandpa reflected God's image through and through. David comes to mind, where God looked at David and said, "He's a man after my own heart," and I know he probably would have said the same thing about Grandpa. And another verse that God brought me to that represents Grandpa is John 13:35, and it says, "For when you demonstrate the same love I have for you by loving one another, everyone will know that you're my true followers." And that was Grandpa. I knew everyone, I'm sure, would experience God's heart because the way Grandpa loved people. And his relationship with Jesus is really encouraging as well. He always wanted to check in with us and make sure that we loved Jesus and that we knew God, and he would always encourage us and pray with us. And he always sang this song, it's "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," and I just remember that all the time. And I know I have hope that I'm going to see my Grandpa again. So this is a celebration, and just because, God's real. He rescued me out of a lot of stuff, a lot of addiction and darkness, and brought me hope. And I know that my Grandpa, I'm going to get to see him again, and his body's been redeemed, that he's no longer in pain, and so I have hope in that. And I also just wanted to share a letter that I wrote to my Grandpa. I was feeling really sad because I miss him. So this is a letter directly to my Grandpa, so I'm just going to invite you into this space, and I'm basically going to be speaking to my Grandpa. "Hey, Gramps, I just wanted to reach out and tell you that I miss you. I miss your silly jokes, long stories, and your hugs. I miss crawling up on your lap and eating grapefruit and cuddling with you. I love you so much, and I also miss your silly faces. You never cared what anyone thought of you. You never changed who you were to please anyone. You always remained the God-fearing, loving husband, father, grandfather that you were created to be. I hate that you're gone so soon, but also I would be selfish. It would be selfish of me to ask and want you to come back to your broken body. I hate that you won't ever meet my future husband or meet my future kids, but one day in heaven. And I'll always have stories to share with them. I know they'll fill your heart through these stories. Anyways, I can't stop thinking about you, so I had to write to you. I love you so much, and I miss you even more, my sweet, sweet Grandpa."
So we're going to transition into allowing you to tell your stories. You've heard a few from us, and since I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and share a couple stories. And before everyone else, my mom wants to share something, and then we'll just kind of have you come up and share your stories of how you know Dad, his Carrolisms, as you would say. And when Nicole was up here, just one little thing, I remember Dad braiding her hair and saying, "Okay, make sure you close your eyes real tight, because I'm going to braid your hair so tight that if your eyes are open, you're not going to be able to shut them." So she would just squint her eyes so tight, and Dad would just be back there smiling, braiding her hair. It's so funny. But my dad was the strongest and most humble man I knew. Because he was strong, he expected us to be strong, not only physically, but spiritually, emotionally, mentally, which got me through many challenges in my life. I don't think Dad ever saw a glass half empty. It was always full or overflowing because the potential of it to be full was always there. My first time that I ever drove a truck and trailer, this is just a short story to illustrate that. The first time I ever drove a truck and trailer, I was in high school. And it was at the Palmer Fair, and we're bringing back some animals, and Dad had to stay there for a little bit. And I looked at the gas tank, and I said, Dad, there's only a quarter tank in here. And I said, we need to get some more gas. Do you have some money? I could get some gas. He goes, oh, don't worry about it. That gas gauge doesn't work. It's full. I was like, okay, all right. I mean, why would you question him, right? And I never looked at the gas tank, the gas gauge, until it ran out of gas in Sterling. And it just so happened that it ran out of gas right in front of someone that my dad knew, which helped us out. And so it just shows, Dad just knew everybody, and everybody was willing to help if there was a crisis or something, whether it was my dad or us. The more I think about it, my dad wasn't just that one usable tool that I spoke about earlier. He wasn't just that one usable tool in the drawer. He was like a Swiss Army knife. He had a solution for everything. And my brother John and I were talking about this the other day, and we both agreed that whenever Dad was around, there was nothing you had to worry about. Even though things didn't go the way it was supposed to, which many times it didn't matter, because there was always peace. Dad had a plan for everything, and there was no need to worry. He could fix it. And so we've come to a place now where we want to give you the opportunity to share your story. Since there's so many of you, and I've told that the solstice starts at 2, so we'll just kind of keep it going. If you have a story to come up and tell, and then we'll, I think my mom is wanting, is she going to come up here?
I think I talk loud enough I don't even need the mic, but I'm very pleased to see all of you here to celebrate Carol's life. Every evening he'd say our prayers, and he'd say, Lord, take us to heaven together while we're sound asleep hugging each other. Well, I'm a little bit mad at him because he left me here alone, and Carol didn't like cats, so now I have a cat. And so I need to tell you a little bit about our life. We raised our kids with a animal and housework work ethic. I never did a thing in the house once my 2 young boys got into like 5th and 6th grade. They did all the chores, they did all the housework. All I did was give them a snack when they got home, have them do their homework. Then they would get to do the chores while they watched TV. And so I want to plug in for the way I raised my kids. And Carol was really the guiding force. All of my children have strong work ethic, and my adopted son, John, who was a special order by Blair when Blair was 5 years old and we had adopted Lisa. The caseworker met us in the hall and the building, and she looked at Blair and she said, well, what do you think of your little sister by now? And he said, well, she's okay, but when are you going to bring me my brother? So he special ordered John, and John is absolutely the smartest human that I know. And right now he's working on an oil platform, making $4,000 a day. And it all starts with the work ethic that Carol forced on our kids as they were growing up. And of course, you know, this says Farm Family of the Year. And then there's all kinds of other awards that say Carrol and Joanne Martin and Carrol and Joanne Martin. Well, shoot, it's all Carrol Martin, and I just went along for the ride. And I want to talk to you during this long weekend that if there's any money made, it's going to James and Maddie's farm. And I have these cards that shows kind of a picture of James and Maddie's farm. And we're going to build 2 more homes. We want couples, they can even bring their own children to come and take care of kids that are runaway kids, kicked out kids, throwaway kids, disadvantaged kids, disabled kids, just kids. And so thank you so much for coming. Thank you for listening to me. I was married to Carrol for almost 58 years. We've had some ups and downs, but mostly ups. And I wake up at night saying, I don't know how to do this. I can't ask Carrol. So it's all kinds of questions, like these dandelions. Carrol knew how to make a batter and cook wonderful dandelions and fiddleneck ferns. He made a batter, and I don't know how to do that. So anyhow, we miss Carrol. I thank you so very much for coming, and enjoy the whole weekend. And Wiley, I'm so glad he's here. He invited himself to the first festival that we had, and he's been attending frequently because he has relatives also in the state. So thank you all. Thank you.
I also want to just say that while we're sharing, you're welcome to come up and get a cupcake. Those were all compliments of Kenai Peninsula College. They wanted to do something because Dad had done so much for the college, so they've offered to give us some cupcakes. So you're welcome to come up and share. Is it okay to keep the mic down here?
A lot of people believe and have faith. A lot of people attend 3 church meetings a week, and that's okay. But in all the years that I've walked the planet, I've met very few people who are what I call church going. They were the church. They taught, didn't preach, they lived it. I tried to remember when I first met Carrol Martin. I don't remember. Maybe it was cross-country skiing down the middle of K Beach Road before they opened the bridge going to the radio station. I'm not sure. But one thing I do know, that of all the places that I've been, when I'm in a place where Carrol Martin was, I knew I was right where I was supposed to be. I could be up here all afternoon, and Mike's got his hook talking about the times Carrol and I shared. But I don't grieve for Carrol. Joanne, you're not alone. You never will be. Told you that. But I grieve for the young people who won't know Carrol, who won't be over there at the barn when we're dispatching a lamb and saying a kosher prayer as the lamb goes to sleep and the blood is shed. We did that many, many times. The 4-H auction, the kids that were blessed, kids that went to college because of them. Those that won't have that opportunity, I think it's okay to be sad. I know it makes me sad because I don't know anybody else like Carrol Martin. I don't know anyone who can do a kosher dispatch of a lamb and then give a biological lesson, not only about the spiritual blood, but about the lungs and the heart and how it all works together, and see those young people walk away with a faith from a man who walked his faith. I'm going to miss him. But I'm also sad that there won't be those to replace him. So I challenge you, all of the kids and grandkids, to be Carrol, to be church going. Thank you.
Hi, Joanne. My name is Shirley. Wow, that's loud. That's loud. That's okay. I am one of those youth that this gentleman just talked about. Even though I'm not in my youth now, I was when I met Carrol. I think I was involved in their life pretty early after they got here because I was able to board their cattle at my house. And it was spoken about a little earlier about how, I think Lisa mentioned it, about how Dad always had a solution for everything, and nothing was a problem. So when I had to pick up the phone one day and call Carrol and say, Carrol, your cows got out, somebody ran over one of them, and we need to do something. And I was very upset, distraught, that I was in trouble. Not with Carrol. He boxed up his kids and came down, and we butchered that cow in the middle of the winter, and it was all good. So anyway, so that started my relationship with Carrol, and then it wasn't very long till Carrol and Joanne both approached me about being a 4-H leader. So I did that. I became a 4-H leader when I was, 18. I was barely out of high school. And I think they were schooling me up because it wasn't 2 years later then they approached me and said, how about doing a horse camp in Untitled? And I was scared to death. I didn't have kids. You mean a horse camp with teenagers? How do I deal with that? So, long story, but we have had a very successful youth horse camp in Untitled for many years. Several of you here have been there. And it was basically just because Carrol and Joanne had a dream, and I helped them put it together. Sorry if I'm getting teary here, because this next part of the story is pretty touching to me. So 4-H used to have a big awards program at the end of their year. We'd all celebrate everything we've done, and everybody would get their awards. And one of the, and they may still do it, I don't know, Linda, if they still give out year-end pins. So you would get a year-end pin depending on how many years you had been in 4-H. And I remember Carrol got the first one I remember, he got his 43rd year-end pin. And I thought, I want to be like that guy. I want to do that. And because of circumstances, I wasn't able to do that. But he set such a high standard for me as a 4-H leader. I learned so much from him through, and his love of kids was amazing. Thank you, Carrol.
You have heard much about Carrol, and it is all true. I was blessed by him very, very much. A great big pole barn built on our property. I mean, a big one. And then, on top of that, a big riding corral. And he wouldn't take a penny. So I was overly blessed. And as you have heard so far, he was one of a kind. Thank you.
I know how awkward it is to get up and tell a story, but I also know that Josiah is here recording this, and this is a great opportunity for everyone to immortalize Carrol a little bit. So if you have a story, please get brave for us and come on up and share.
All right, I'm sorry. Hey, well, I'm a slow learner. But anyway, my wife and I, Diana, we've been neighbors with the Martins for as long as we've lived in Alaska, which is, 33 or 4 years now. But anyway, I really don't have any real stories to tell. But I know that Carrol was a great neighbor, and he was a good friend. I came home from work one time, worked out the chemical plant, and I came home and Carrol had done my driveway. He just hauled in a bunch of pit run and had my driveway, and it was a very, very kind gesture. I appreciated it. And anyway, I just know, all of his family. We've known them, and just appreciate the kind of people they are. They're country people, and they remind me a lot of folks that I know from Nebraska. We moved up in '86, and you get up here and you're a long ways from family, and then you run into people and meet them, and it's a good feeling whenever you find people with kindred hearts. And I grew up on a ranch, my wife on a dairy farm, so we had a lot in common with the Martins, and I think that's enough to say. Goodbye.
Hi, I'm Sharon Gurmann. Joanne hired me in Bethel into the 4-H office in the early 90s, and we've been friends with the Martins ever since. Over the years, we've talked about the stories that Carrol told. You didn't have to be around him 5 minutes to know he was a consummate storyteller. And we've talked about getting them written down and doing something with them. And so I think about last Christmas, we started talking about it, wasn't it, Joanne? That we'd write them down, and we decided that I would interview him or let him talk. I didn't have to interview him. I just turned the mic on, and he took off. And this was important to him. He thought about what he wanted to say, and I had a blast. It was so much fun. But we've got all those recorded. I've put a text into them, and the plan is that we'll take what you write on the Carrol Martin Memorial page, what you say here today, that we'll put it all together into a book that'll be coming out here at some point. So I just wanted to share that. Also, he made the best bacon in the world. He put flour on it, which I'd never seen before. When he cooked it in the pan, he put flour on it and then turned it over and put flour on it again. Oh man, it sucked up all the good taste and the juice in it, and it was just wonderful.
So my sister couldn't be here. She's in Arkansas, but she had a story that she wanted me to share. I think it was, I don't remember how old we were, but we were able to sleep in Grandma and Grandpa's bed, and Grandpa wore dentures. So one morning, Grandpa couldn't find his dentures anywhere. He looked and looked, and Ariana rolled over, and she felt something poking in her back, and they were stuck to her back. So another time, he loved caramel apple suckers, and those were his favorites. So I remember him coming down to Arkansas and visiting us. And he sucked on one for a while, and then he looked at us and he said, "You know why you're not supposed to eat sugar?" And he pulled the sucker out, and it was stuck to his dentures. It pulled all of his teeth out. He said, "Because you'll lose your teeth." So he always had a joke, but, it also scared me to not eat so much sugar. I think there was another one, but I know Grandpa loved to cook and danishes and all kinds of things. So all of us grandkids would always go over to his house and have fresh danishes, fresh donuts, and beer batter halibut and black cod, or beer batter halibut and salmon. And so I made beer batter mushrooms the other day in memory of him. But anyways, yeah, you're missing that. If you haven't tried his beer batter stuff, you missed out. But it was probably the best that's ever been made. But anyways, so.
Hello, my name is Debbie Brown. I first got to know Carrol and Joanne in the early 80s, possibly earlier. I wore these heels, these open-toe shoes, to this event because it reminds me of Carrol and something that he said to me one time. He looked at these shoes that I was wearing, and in the environment that I was in, he knew I was a farm girl. He knew I was a worker, but he looked down and he knew he could tease me. So he says, "What are you wearing those shoes for? How can you do any work in those shoes?" Anyway, there's so much that all of us can say. The stories are truly quite endless, and he was a source of strength he was a resource, just an invaluable resource. I had opportunity many years in public service. If the Kenai Peninsula Borough needed to consider classification of lands, Carrol Martin was a wonderful resource. He studied the lands and he knew where all the rich agricultural lands were located. He would weigh in with us many times on what would be the best classification for a land or why not, because it might be a better classification a different way. The depth and the breadth of the kinds of things that Carrol Martin knew. I mean, I could call him if I have dairy goats, and I do own horses. Also, I'm a farm girl, so I just love my animals. But if I ever had a problem, I could call Carrol. If I didn't know what to do in a certain circumstance, and the veterinarian was not available, I could call Carrol, and pretty much he could tell me what to do in a pinch about anything. And I just tell you, Joanne, you had the joy and the privilege. What a time I'm sure you've had with Carrol. And the Lord, our Lord, I'm glad you said that, Joanne, because our Lord, our faith, our Lord Jesus, those of us that are church going, we always knew that we shared just our faith, and throughout the entire family. And I've enjoyed interaction, Joanne, with all of you and your bunch and the kids. And I just really, it's just a blessing to me. You've all been a blessing to this community. And you never went to a parade or where there was the aroma of some barbecue. You pretty much knew, you got to go over there and say hi to Carrol to see if it's Carrol that's behind making that barbecue smell so wonderful. So we loved him. We love you, Joanne. If you need anything, just call all of us. We'll come a-running. Thank you very much.
I'm Holly. Oh, is that too loud? Nope. Okay. I met Carrol about 25 years ago as a first-year 4-H'er when I was 9. And I ended up getting the smallest tiny pig in the bunch because that's what little girls do when they got to go pick them out. They get the tiny little pink one. And we got it home, and she had been injured in the trailer ride. And I had this sickly little tiny pig with a broken leg, and I had no clue what to do. So we called Nancy Veal, and she said, give Carrol Martin a call. And it could have ended badly. I could have been a kid who didn't end up with 4-H pig that year, and it would have been terrible. But we called Carrol, and I'm sure I was crying because, 9-year-old girls. And he said, I have just the solution. And he brought me over the second pig, and he said, just raise them both, take them both to fair, whichever one does better, auction, and the other one just give back to me. And he paid for half the feed, and he helped me along, gave me all the advice I needed. And it turned out great. I ended up with reserve champion in lightweight class that year and gave him back his piglet. And a couple years later, I decided I wanted to tackle steers. 80-pound, tiny little redhead girl, decided I was going to raise a steer that year. So he took me out to this field and said, you pick whatever one you want, and I'll let you take his mama home with him, and you can raise them up together, and that way he can grow big and strong because he'll have all the extra milk. And so he helped me pick out a good one, and I brought him home, and I got grand champion that year with my steer. Carrol helped me all the way, and then he took that cow back out and bred her for me and brought her back. And so my following year steer was able to be born at my house, and I got the entire experience he paid for all of her feed. He never charged her for it, and he was there the whole time, even when they escaped and were running over to Kiski for like a week. He never judged me for that. He was always there to lend a helping hand, and he definitely has been one of the highlights of my 4-H experience. Out of the 34 years of my life, I have spent 18 years in 4-H, and I credit a lot of that to him. I could have probably just ended that first year with a sad little broken pig, but he has been a true inspiration to this program.
Hi, my name is Laurel, and I'm from Seldovia. And number one, Carrol would just always be like, "What's going on in Seldovia, Laurel? What's going on? What you guys been doing down there?" And we'd get our fill in every day, every time I saw him. Every time he saw me, he'd be like, "You're here? What are you doing here?" But I just love that this was always the most welcoming place to come to. And it's just weaves through the spirit of Carrol Martin, weaves through everything that happens here at the Diamond M Ranch. And I just think so much is rooted in his spirit. And I just wanted to say that Carrol was always and will always be quite a dandy in our lives. And so because I personally have a real love myself for the yellow flowers that bestow the field, and people might be inclined to disparagingly call them weeds. I love them. And I think they've got an incredible amount of value in our lives. And we know that through the nutritional value and the beauty that they bring. And y'all have nice dandelions here. And in Seldovia, I would say that our dandelions reach to the sky and they're hip high, and so we just love them and celebrate them. And so just like that, we love and celebrate Carrol, and he reached to the sky and was way beyond hip high, right? So here's a poem that I wanted to share with you that brings Carrol's spirit to mind. Okay, I'm going to take off my glasses. I'm a little old. Okay, hang on. Just think of Carrol as you hear these words. The dandelion begins its dance every spring. Beautiful colors, ever-changing costumes, green to yellow, white. Beautiful admired costumes follow, yellow and green, dances sideways with every gush of wind. Progressively it changes, white, beautiful, snowflake dancers, spin in circles, fluttering through the wind, spinning, turning, dancing among all other flowers, spreading their beauty, seedlings flying, dancing in the air, grace and beauty floating. With one wish to plant their seeds of beauty and grace, to spread the desire to dance. The heavens are their stage, forever, dancing through the endless skies, forever. It does not last forever, it dies, but not completely. The memory of it, floating, dancing, spinning, lasts forever.
So, my name is Cassie. I've been a 4-H mom forever. Joanne, I've known how much you and Carrol have done, but it wasn't until I became the 4-H program manager that I really realized exactly how much. There's not a youth program in 4-H that hasn't been influenced by Carrol Martin. When you come to the fair and you see our kids in white and black, you'll see they have a green bow tie or a green barrette or ribbons or a vest. That's because Carrol and Joanne love to see the kids wear green. I cannot imagine how many tens of thousands of hours Mr. Carrol Martin has poured into our 4-H programs. I can't imagine how many tens of thousands of dollars he's poured into our programs. He's been everywhere. He would tell stories about taking kids down the Alcan. We were in Fairbanks for a leadership forum up there. Sure enough, there was Carrol and Joanne. We joke in 4-H how people who are really gung-ho 4-Hers, how they bleed green. Carrol bled green. Because he did, so many of us, green is our favorite color. Joanne, we're so thankful. We're so thankful. We just so appreciate everything that you and Carrol have done for 4-H in this community.
I'm just filling in the gap until more of you get brave to come up here and talk. Since we were talking about 4-H, and I just remember when Dad always would bring up quality cattle from the lower 48. And he would bring up several steers, and we would do steer. I would do steer, and my brothers would too. And he would make sure, he said, I'm going to bring up some really good cattle coming up, but you guys won't get first pick. Everybody else will get first pick, and you can have last pick because we don't want, because we don't want anyone to think that you have an advantage, that I'm your dad. And that was just the type of person he was.
Hi, my name is Jessica, and after knowing that most people here have a lifetime of stories with Carrol, I have 2 years worth of stories, so not much. But my big time of knowing Carrol was I started working here at the ranch 2 summers ago, and I got partnered with him to do all of our farm tours, which I grew up in the suburbs of Minnesota. I enjoyed going out to farms and seeing farm animals, but I do not know much about animals. So Carrol was the perfect person to partner with to go on all these tours, and the stories that he'd share. I never knew what the farm tour was going to look like because the stories would come up that would be different. The history of how he got the cattle to come up here originally, the history of working with the animals, and the crazy stories of everything that has happened on the property was a wealth of knowledge that unfortunately I can't remember everything that he had to say. But it was just so fun to every weekend or every Saturday and Wednesday to go out with him and watch him interact with the kids and with the animals. And in the last year, as he was slowing down, the one thing we could always count on was Saturday morning at 10:30. He'd meet me at the office, and rain or shine, no matter how he was feeling, he was ready to go on that farm tour and talk with the kids and love on the kids and teach them about where their food comes from, and squirt milk into kids' mouths or all over their faces, and watching the kids' reaction with that. And so I'm just blessed that I got to have at least 2 years with him and learn what I know about farming and animals, and pretty much everything I know is because of Carrol taking the time to teach me. And it was just nice I never knew if I should call him Carrol or if I should call him Grandpa or Grandpa Carrol. So he got called everything while he was here because he became a grandpa in the last 2 years. So.
My name's Josiah. My father's Blair. Grandpa's my Carrol. Carol's my grandpa. And I'm a good public speaker. So, so you keep hearing a bunch of stories about how he's done so many things and how he's impacted all these people's lives. And it's crazy, just how he was able to fit that all in. Well, not only was he good at everything, but he was incredibly efficient at everything. He butchered cows and was incredibly fast at picking off the best cuts of meat and making bacon and all sorts of things. I have really fond memories going clam digging with him, and he would always be able to spot the clam and chase the clam down. The razor clams, they'd take off into the sand, and he'd always be able to get on his knees and pick up a bunch of clams. And my little brother Matty, there's a picture of him in a bucket, or maybe it's Toad, or maybe it's both of them, but he just got a 5-gallon bucket with my little brother in it, and then a clam shovel in the other hand. And it's so cute. So not only did he get buckets full of clams, but he raised up his grandchildren really well. On my 9th birthday, he bought my sister and I a birthday present, and they were 2 Jersey milk cows. And he taught us how to milk cows. And that is where I learned a lot of responsibility and time management, which my sister helped me out, waking me up every morning at 6 a.m. to go milk the cows. And Grandpa would go with us to help us out until we got comfortable doing it on our own. But he was always able to milk 1 cow while my sister and I were sitting on the other cow milking all 4 teats at the same time. And he'd still beat us no matter, even though it was 2 against 1. So he was really fast at that. And all the people that would fillet salmon in our park, he was a stickler for being a good steward of the food and making sure you're not wasteful. And so he'd go teach anyone that was throwing even a sliver of salmon away how to correctly fillet a salmon, so that way they would get a nice full fillet and not be throwing a bunch of scraps in the trash. So I really appreciated that about my grandpa.
My name is Ryan, and I am new to the Carrol Martin game because I am brand new to the family. So, in my time knowing Grandpa Carrol, he was just kooky, quirky grandpa that always wanted to tell some stories, and he took advantage of me being new to the family. One day in particular, when he said, "Ryan, come here. I was like, yes, I gotta tell you a story." And he starts telling me a very elaborate story about a rabbi and a penguin and something else. And I'm very focused. I want to make a good impression. I'm listening to Grandpa. I'm in on it. And I look over to Josiah and Blair, and they're just also very intently listening. And this story is going on forever, and I am wondering where it's going, and then finally all at the same time everybody says the punchline, and the whole story was just this elaborate joke that we were playing on Ryan because she's new to the family, didn't know any better, and every time after that he asked me if I remember that punchline, and he always reminded me that he knew people from Littleton where I was, and that, you know, how are you doing with this? And fantastic memory at an old age. And absolutely highlight of the wedding is when he got on the dance floor and gave me his hat to go dance with. So I'll always remember that. So thanks, Grandpa Carrol.
My name is Forrest Nelson, and I've known the Martins since the late 70s. I had a family of 4, and my husband and I lived in Hope. I've been involved in 4-H since I was a kid, and so I knew a lot about 4-H, and I really, really strongly believe in it and what it does for kids and families. I wasn't saved at the time, but I decided that I'd like to come down to the peninsula and see about maybe we could start a 4-H club there in Hope. We had lots of kids running around and nothing to do, and the parents really didn't care much, so I just thought, boy, they're just ripe for the picking, you know. So I came down. Joanne was the extension agent at the time, and she and Carrol. You know, one thing we have all taken for granted, perhaps, is that you're treated like family. And not just treated like family, you just really feel like you're part of the family. And so that's how I felt. And when it came time for excuse me, I wanted to back up. During that time, I would bring a load of kids that I could pack in one car without seat belts or anything else to get down here to the events, to be part of the 4-H down here. And we'd camp out here, we'd camp out at the fairgrounds. We had lots of tents and went through some miserable fair times with the rain, but that's beside the point. Anyway, most of these leaders were praying for me and my family, and I didn't know it. And they were just exemplified what God was, and I didn't really know. It was just good, and it was love, and it was kindness. And like I said, everybody really felt like we were family right off the bat. So anyway, times got hard and my life changed, and during that time, we moved out of Hope, and I worked for the post office, and I got a job here finally. But I had to come down at the drop of a hat, bring the kids and everything else. And Carrol and Joanne, hey, we got room. Just come stay with us. Doesn't matter how long. Wouldn't take any money. 4 busy kids, and so we stayed for a couple of months. And during that time, Carrol reminded me of how to milk a cow. I had done that a long time ago as a kid, but got back into it, and we had Murdoch then. I'm sure most of the Martins will remember old Murdoch. And so when the Martins would go somewhere, I would get to milk the cows, taught all my kids to milk, and it was just kind of a really cool thing. But then my life fell apart, and I no longer had a husband with me, and so I was by myself. And, you know, I just kind of mulled over, where am I going? Where's my life? I'm in my 40s. And it just seems like there's got to be more. And so I started attending church. And all of a sudden, all these folks in 4-H just kind of popped out at me and said, "Oh, we've been praying for you for a long time." And it was the Martins, and just a bunch of, that whole background was all based in faith. I never saw anything but it in action. You know, nobody said, "Oh, you need to know Jesus." Nobody. They didn't have to, because they exemplified that. And Carrol was at the top of the heap for that. Just, you know, I didn't talk much to him. I just watched him, and I saw what he did, and so it changed my life. I've been a Christian now for 30 years and never looked back. But I just know that the root was right here on this ranch. And don't you think you never did anything, Joanne, because you know different. So it's easy to praise this family, and I thank you that I've been blessed to be a part of it. But the bigger picture is, if you don't know Jesus here, you better start thinking about it. I venture to say probably everybody does, but you just never know. And I'm not going to miss an opportunity to tell you that it's not that hard. You want to know more about this Jesus as anybody around here can tell you. So I'm just blessed, and I know where all this stems from, and it's from people like the Martins, and I just want to thank you for being a part.
Hello. I'm Will Tyeski. I'm Carrol and Joanne's first grandchild. Grandma always reminded everybody about that. But there's so many stories that I had with Grandpa and being here in the farm and around the family, but one in particular, I went down to Colorado to go elk hunting with him, and my dad Glenn and my Uncle John came. And we drove around. We spent 4 or 5 days up in the mountains. Couldn't find anything. It was too snowy. So we came back down the mountain, and we were driving along in these old farm roads, and he said, "Oh, stop here. I used to know this family here." And they had a big, I don't know, must have been 80 acres. We pull in there, and of course the parents that he knew weren't there, but the kids were there. And he struck up a conversation and talked to them into letting us go hunt on their land. And I ended up shooting an elk the next morning at their place. But without Grandpa, that might have not ever happened. So he's taught me a lot, and things that I'm still figuring out, that is settling in, life lessons, and I'm sure it'll go on for the rest of my life.
Well, I need to tell you a story about Lisa and Carrol milking a cow. Two people would milk a cow, one on one side and one on the other side. And Carrol would come into the house and he'd say, "You can't believe what Lisa and I talked about. I'm so glad that cow was between us so she couldn't see my red face." And but Lisa, that the man just talking is Lisa's son, and she really taught him well. She took driver's ed in high school, and she followed every rule, and she's an excellent, excellent driver. And Will has never been in a car without being fastened properly in a seat belt or in a carrier. And he was 3 years old, and he got in the truck with Grandpa Carrol, and Will fastened his seatbelt. And he said, "Fasten your seatbelt, Grandpa." And Carrol shrugged. He says, "Oh, I don't need to." Well, Will started screaming. And if you've ever heard a young kid at 3 years old scream, it hurts your ears. Will screamed until they got out to the highway from over at the ranch house. And Carrol thought, well, I better fasten my seatbelt. He fastened his seatbelt, and Will said, "Thank you, Grandpa." So I just had to tell that story about Will and Lisa. And now Rana is wanting me to shut up so you guys can get on with your life.
All right. Well, I was married into the Martin family. My parents here, John and Dolores Lindemann, and back in the late 60s and early 70s, if you raised animals and you were on the Kenai Peninsula, you knew each other. And so Shirley Cox, as she got up and...
You need to be on the stage.
They want me on the stage. Okay. Shirley Cox was up here, Sharon, and we actually took care of one of her dairy cows one time at our place in Ninilchik there. But the first memory I have of Carrol Martin is actually coming down to the Lindemann farm in Ninilchik and putting shoes on our horses' hooves. And I think there was actually a castration of one of our stallions as well. You know, you didn't need a vet, you just needed Carrol Martin. And so that is my earliest memory. And then just coming into the family, Grammy was out in Bethel, and so Blair and I just joined Grandpa in the house because he was by himself, and that's where we kind of got started in our marriage in 1990. And then we were out in Sleep Mute, and Grandpa came out, and he's like, "Hey, there's no grandkids on the property. I need you guys to bring your 2 grandkids home, and I'll help you get an RV park going." Well, little by little, that's what this all turned into. Matter of fact, is this pasture was a bunch of trees, and plowing those all up, turning it into a pasture for the animals. One of the things that he really wanted was to continue the education and understanding of agricultural and sustainable ag, and both from the horticultural standpoint as well as the animal husbandry standpoint. And so that is the education that we want to continue on through the James and Maddie farm. And let's see, there was one thing. Oh, I wanted to share with you. Recently, I got to take Grammy and Grandpa over to Hawaii, and we spent a month over on Molokai, and Grandpa and my daily trot was down to the beach at sunset, and we would sit on the bench and we would talk and we would share and we would watch God's beautiful creation unfold. And I just wanted to share with you a couple of verses that really stood out to Grandpa and I. So Romans 15:13, may the God of all hope fill you with joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. And John 11:25 through 26, Jesus said to Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though he dies, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? And then Psalm 139:16, talking to God, your eyes saw my unformed body. Before a day they were written in his book. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. And so those were just some that we treasured. And then the last one I just wanted to share as kind of an introduction to my husband to come up and kind of wrap this up for us is Proverbs 17:22. A cheerful heart doeth good like a medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. And Grandpa did always have that cheerful heart. And so we're hoping with this little story that Blair's going to read to you to wrap up our conversations, you'll enjoy and get some laughter to go with you for the rest of the day.
Thanks, Ronna. Yeah, before Ron and I were married, I was attending UAF, and Dad called and said he was looking at the Anchorage paper and noticed that there was a world-renowned kayak designer giving a lecture at Alaska Pacific University, and I probably really should go check it out. And I went there, and was sitting in the back of the lecture hall listening to the adventures of a guy who would get called by different governments from around the world to fly in and make lectures and teach people what he had studied of the Aleutian Bidarka and the unique style of construction. And at the end of his lecture, he explained that when he was 19 years old, he ran into Carrol Martin in a small village named native village in British Columbia, Canada. And the reason that he decided to follow his dreams and live in a tree house and design kayaks instead of following his father's footsteps, who was a rocket scientist and a world-renowned physicist, and his grandpa was a knighted mathematician from England, he decided that if a cowboy from the southwest Colorado could jump on a World War II Army Corps surplus tugboat that was designed to be in the harbor, not out in the ocean, and captain it all the way up the Inside Passage from Seattle to Juneau, he could go ahead and fulfill his dreams and not worry about what other people thought. And so, and then he said, and by the way, there's little Joe, the 9-year-old first mate in the back row. And so there was a biographer that heard about his story and comparing and contrasting the two men and their similarities, but their divergent paths in life. And a whole chapter was dedicated to describe his trip coming up the Inside Passage. And so when I was teaching in Sleep Mute, working with the students and modeling reading, it was always a struggle to get the kids to sit down for 15 minutes and read to them, and they'd show them how much fun reading could be. And I started reading this book, and 45 minutes into the reading, everybody was still quiet and listening, and I'm like, well, reading time's over. We're going to have to pick this up tomorrow. And so I'm going to try to read about 15 minutes of this book and give you a little glimpse of what other people saw of my dad. Yeah, and the title of the book is called The Starship and the Canoe, in a way to as a play on words for the rocket scientist who was developing a escape module to help save mankind from any nuclear holocaust at the beginning of the Cold War. Everybody was really concerned that we could just wipe out this planet. So he had a spherical-shaped, pressurized vessel the size of a small city that would propel into outer space in case we destroyed this home. So in the summer and his name was George Dyson. In the summer of 1973, George spent a week investigating the inlets and islands of northern Hansen Island. At the end of that week, the wind turned against him and he began to blow briskly from the north. Paddling against the wind, even a mild one, is hard work in a bidarka. So George came about, raised sail, and in a single long day traveled 80 miles back to Hansen Island. The next day, he sat at a pub at Allert Bay, an Indian town near Hansen. He was passing time, waiting for the mail, when a man in cowboy boots and a cowboy hat sat down beside him. The uniform was peculiar. In George's northern woods, cork boots and wool caps were more the style. George, curious, and loosened by a little beer, struck up a conversation. The cowboy, he learned, was from Colorado, and his name was Carrol Martin. Upon comparing notes, Martin and George realized they had met before, when Martin was a hunting guide in the Rockies and George was a pot washer for the Sierra Club campout trip. Martin now was waiting too, not for mail, but for a diesel part for his tugboat. The tug, said Martin, was towing a barge. The barge, he claimed, was full of hay, cows, and horses bound for Alaska. When he got his diesel part, he planned to charter a float plane and fly back to his ailing tug, then resume his expedition north. George did not believe the part about the hay, cows, and horses. No one would barge such a zoo up the Inside Passage to Alaska. But he was alert, and like all his brothers who scuffle for a living on British Columbia's waterways, at the chance to turn a buck, he continued to listen. The Desanqua had just arrived from the south. That was a sailboat that he was familiar with. He had friends on it. And George offered to charter her to Martin at a price that would beat the bush pilots. Martin agreed. Martin's story was all true, it turned out. He and his hay, horses, and cows were headed for Juneau, where he planned to start a new ranch and a new life. He needed someone who knew about boats, and he invited George to come along. George thought about it. Juneau, he knew, was somewhere near Glacier Bay, and Glacier Bay's deep inlets were the very last of the Inside Passage. The bay was thus the roof of his 900-mile house. This was a guy who lived in a tree house in a Douglas fir that was 150 feet off the ground. So George figured it was a poor tenant who never checked his shingles, so he agreed to go. He traveled so lightly that no arrangements or goodbyes were necessary. He just hauled his bidarka up on the barge. It was a weird change, he says. One day I'm in the canoe going south. The next day I'm heading north in a barge full of animals. I'm doing the chores. I've never done chores before. I had to feed and water the animals, 45 gallons for the horses and cows between them. The barge was beautiful, though. It was Colorado. You could walk around and smell the hay. 110 feet long, 40 feet wide, the barge carried 3 cows, 4 horses, 25 tons of hay, 6,000 gallons of water, a pickup truck, a 12 by 60 house trailer, and enough lumber for a house, and tons of food and gear. It was Martin's Ark. Martin's Ark contained everything he would need for a fresh start. It was a whole settlement, and yet it was pulled by a mini tug. George had seen this sort of configuration before. In the forgiving waters of the Inside Passage, barges were often comically overloaded. George has intercepted them on his bidarka on the strength of his arm. He has camped on the points of land and watched them pass him cheerily on in the flood tide, then pass him again on the ebb going backwards. But Martin's setup was an extreme case. The tug was meant for pulling a couple of logs around a harbor, George says. And here it was towing a 100-foot barge. Underpowered is not even the word. It could hardly move against the tide. We made 4 knots at dead calm. It's the old story. You can move the Queen Mary with an outboard, but you can't move her fast. For me, it was interesting because I had to use all the skill I had learned with my canoe. I had to play the tides and the winds. There was no radio phone. A tugboat going between Seattle and Alaska with no radio phone, that's unheard of. There was no compass either, no radar. We didn't even have a working alternator on the engine. And there was no winch for the tow line. Instead, we hitched the line up to the truck and drove back and forth on the barge. We lost the reverse gear in Prince Rupert. We had no reverse gear. It's a hassle with no reverse gear, bringing a 100-foot barge into town somewhere. Coming in for a landing, they had to aim the barge at the dock and cut the tug away at the precise moment and pray that the speed and trajectory were right. The dock was supposed to capture the barge like Jupiter would have captured Orion, the escape capsule I told you about. But George had no computer to figure the angles. That's how we shook up the cannery, he confessed. Gliding into the dock at Petersburg, the barge rammed the cannery building. The windows filled instantly with the frightened faces of cannery workers. George still winces when he remembers that. Nobody has seen anything like it since. People still talk about it on the coast. It was the most haywire operation I have ever been part of. Carrol Martin was the skipper. George was mate and navigator. The original deckhands were Little Joe Martin, Carol's 9-year-old son, and a hitchhiker from Tucson, whom Carrol had picked up on the turnpike in Seattle. In Kelsey Bay, they absorbed a third deckhand, a wild man from Yukon named Eric. Eric, says George, was returning to Yukon from Vancouver in this monster canoe. It was a 20-foot homemade thing, just hopeless. And even at 9, I remembered how rough it looked. It was like a whale. It had to be buoyed up by the water. It couldn't stand the force of gravity. When he lifted it from the water, things started to snap and break. Eric was the ultimate clumsy guy. Couldn't hammer a straight nail and lazy. But he could steer it a straight course, and he was a great guy. Captain Martin knew nothing about boats. He knew a little about engines, which was a good thing, for George was no hope in that department. Martin had left Colorado because it was becoming too crowded for him. Alaska, he thought, should have sufficient elbow room. Outraged by the freight prices to Alaska, he decided to buy his own tugboat and barge in Tacoma and sent his wife and younger children on ahead to Juneau. On the rainy days of the voyage, Captain Martin was gloomy, anxious to reach Juneau and reunite with his family. On sunny days, though, he saw no reason to rush. He lay back and enjoyed the country as it crept by. That'd be a good place for a farm, he would observe. pointing to some clearing in the forest or pointing high. Look at those goats up there. We'd have good hunting, wouldn't we? On bright days, the skipper seemed to forget his family and the expedition dallied. George would drive the livestock down the beach to graze. Nautical one moment, his life was pastoral the next. There were one or two especially beautiful spots he thought the barge might put out its roots and stay for good. There was enough food and stuff on the barge to keep 10 people alive for 2 years, George says. All kinds of guns, equipment, and everything. There was a huge freezer of meat. We had to eat it. There was nothing else. We ate straight meat like mountain men. It was good meat, though. Elk and beef from Colorado, stuff like that. The rain would return, the idle would end, and the expedition would lurch forward. So 2 days from Juneau, the crew encountered a stiff headwind, and 12 hours of struggle against it. They burned up the last of their fuel. The tug puttered to a stop at the mouth of Tracy Arm, where the ford walls are steep. There was no suitable bottom, and they dragged anchor for a while. Then, with all their cable out, one of the points took hold. They discussed their options. They were off any normal lane of navigation, so the help from another vessel was unlikely. George could sail his Badarka back to Petersburg for help, but there was no guarantee the barge would still be there when he returned. Unable to think of anything, the bargemen, immune to worry by now, just went to sleep. They woke to a bump in the darkness of early morning. A giant tug had tied up to the barge. Its improbable presence here was the result of an old accident. 2 years earlier, to the day, some logs had broken from a boom to drift into Tracy Arm, and the tug had to come to retrieve them before the 2 years elapsed and the logs entered public domain. The captain invited George and the others as they followed him up to the wheelhouse. George's friends were embarrassed at first to mention their difficulty. It was a beautiful wheelhouse, George explains. There was a big brass compass, huge throttles and brass dials. Everything was so solid. Finally, just before leaving the wheelhouse, Carrol Martin forced himself to admit that he was out of diesel fuel. The tug captain happily filled him up. They reached Juneau. At last they reached Juneau. The hitchhiker from Tucson made an ashen appearance, walked shakily from the tug, and wired home for money. Carrol and little Joe had a happy reunion with their family. Eric continued toward homeward to the Yukon. George paused in Juneau for a month and a half, building stalls for Martin's animals and otherwise helping his boss. He lived in his apartment in the old Juneau-made dairy barn, where the horses were continually eating the hay and making a new hay fort for George to live in. And then he decided to continue his northwestern journey. That's the story of my dad.
I'm going to tell a story, and while I'm telling the story, if all the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren could get ready to gather up in front of the stage for a picture with Joanne, that would be pretty amazing. The legacy is going to continue. I met Carrol Martin and Joanne, 18, 17 years ago. I was fair manager for the Kenai Peninsula Fair. And I think every fair going forward will be bittersweet because there isn't a piece of that fairgrounds that I can't look and see Carrol Martin, the Lindemans, Shirley Cox. They built that for all of us as a legacy to continue. And every child that is raised on this peninsula has an opportunity to be something bigger than life because of all that they invested. So let's get a picture. Thank you so much for coming. I'm going to share a small reading and then I'm going to kick it off because it kind of leads. It's a great close and beginning. To everything there is a season, a time of purpose under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck what is planted. Carrol knew all of those things. It goes on to say that there is a time to mourn and a time to dance. And today is about Carrol. And while we mourn, we must also dance for the legacy that he left beyond. So this is our celebration dedicated to Carrol Martin. Enjoy. There will be music for the rest of the day. I hope you'll all join us as Justin Boot brings us his tribute to Carrol with I'll Fly Away, and then he will just segue right on into our Solstice Festival. So thank you all for being here.
Well, the thing that Carrol Martin taught me was that you can do anything you put your mind to. He was the most capable person I have ever known in my entire life. And I'm really glad that I got to spend a couple years with him here on this ranch. Anyway, this is a song that's played at his father's memorial, and his mother's memorial, and his grandfather's memorial. One bright morning, when this life is over, I'll fly away to a home on God's celestial shores. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. When the shadows of this life have grown, I'll fly away. Like a bird whose prison bars have flown, I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. Oh, how glad and happy when we meet, I'll fly away. No more iron shackles on my feet, I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. Oh, I think I forgot the last verse. Wait, there's one more. I know there is. Yeah, there we go. One more weary day, oh, and then I'll fly away to a land where joy will never end. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. Yeah, I'll fly away. And one of the stories that Carrol Martin always told me is how he had a racehorse that won the Iditarod. And it was a true story, I tell you what, it really happened. I even wrote a song about it. Well, back in 1984, Dean Osmore had one hell of a dog yard, and Carrol Martin built a ranch down on K Beach Road. Oh, if home from Colorado, stopped in Bellingham, bought a tugboat and barge, went to the Northland. That began the tale of the Platte hand. She's a racehorse through and through, had a roan, has a blue, white socks on her forelegs and all that jazz. Oh, and she's fast as the wind down to Catchmack Bay and back again. Well, she done won every race that she ever had. Dean Osmond, he was tearing it up, winning those races, running them pups. Had his heart set on that burled arch out in Nome. Well, Dean's resourceful when the pickings are slim, but that race was coming in, his dropbacks were thin, and about that time, well, La Plata and she up and died.